Yep, thanks for joining us today. So glad that you can be here. I'll just sit back and support the session, but I'll let Mike take over.
Awesome. So yeah, so Rachel will just be providing any kind of support in the chat room or anything. So I'll just share my screen. Everybody can see my screen? Yeah, cool. Awesome. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be pretty much using two simple tutorials. One is on walking through how to work with React. And you can follow along using the link I sent you for Glitch. So Glitch, just a quick introduction of what it is. It's an online IDE, integrated developer environment, which allows you to kind of write code and see the changes very quickly. You don't need to install anything. It just makes it easier for people to test concepts quickly without needing to edit, change the operating system or do anything like that. It's just a quick way to do that. So everybody, oh, you're seeing all these anonymous people here. Hey, people. So if you want to follow along, you are open. You can just click the share and fork. There should be a fork option. I think it's here. If you click on the top left of the of your browser window, there should be an option to remix or fork, and that allows you to kind of follow along as we go. So feel free to do that. All right, cool. And once you do that, the best way to see changes when you edit, once you edit, is to copy. There's a live app link, so you can open. There's a project page here. When you click on the share, there's a project page and there's a live app. You click copy and just paste that in your browser. And as we make changes based on the exercises that we're on, you can just go to that page and you should see the live changes there as well. So you don't need to save anything. If you make a change, it just automatically updates. So that's what we're going to be using. Is everybody good? Can I get a thumbs up, thumbs down? If you have a question, thumbs up in the chat window if we're all good and we're all ready to move ahead. It's interactive. Help me out. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Yeah. It's interesting not being able to see people's face and reactions. I'm just talking to myself. They lock people up for that. But we'll keep going. Okay, so if you are new to React, a bit of background as to what it is. React is a JavaScript library for front-end development. I think it's about 4 or 5 years old now. It was developed by the crew at Facebook. And one of the reasons that they developed React is when you're working with front-end interfaces, so anything like you're seeing, anything visual, like a website or an app, it's very hard to reason about the flow of information and how things work, because it's very dynamic. Someone can be scrolling up and down, someone can be clicking, a lot of things are happening. So with an app like Facebook, as you can imagine, there's a lot of features. There's the timeline, there's the chat. A lot of things are happening at the same time. And React was created as a way to manage all that changes so that the application can react, get it, to the changes very quickly in a way that makes sense. Because if you've ever worked with JavaScript, and you understand the concept of callbacks and changing when things happen, and you need to react to that change, it's kind of hard to reason about that in a logical manner. And this library was created to try and work with that. So that's kind of like the brief background. And so from the documentation here, they say React is declarative, efficient, and flexible. And it lets you compose complex user interfaces from small isolated pieces of code called components. Now, what that basically means is everything in React is a component. A component is just a small piece of code or a small section of code that defines a particular view, like a particular or behavior. So if we look at the context of this screen, for example, each part of this is probably a component. So this whole section could be a component, or this small section, etc. So the building blocks of anything in React is something called the component, right? And so this is just an example component that they've given. And in this case, what they've done, if you've used HTML before, you'll know that HTML is what's called a declarative language. Now, a declarative language just is a fancy way of saying that you write down what you want to see, as opposed to writing down logic. To give an example, a better example of what that looks like, I'm just going to quickly bring up one of my old presentations I did on this particular subject very quickly. So if we think of imperative versus declarative, so this is an example of code. If you're looking at my screen, there are two examples here. One is declarative, one is imperative. Declarative says fruits.filter return a function f is peeled. It's easier to reason about this than this. They both do the same thing. All the code is doing is saying, I have some fruit. I want you to filter all the ones that are peeled and return that variable to me. Again, I'm making the assumption that you guys have a background in JavaScript or some sort of programming language, because that will make it easy. If you don't, then let me know. I can probably send you in the right direction. So if you look at this, the declarative says, I have fruits, filter it. Here's the function to filter it. Imperative says, I have some fruits. I want to loop through each one of them. There's an if loop. It's like there's an if statement. If it's peeled, add it to this array, and then return the array at the end. It's not that it's wrong. It's just this is a lot easier to reason about than imperative code. And that's why that's one of the benefits for React. So again, another way to think about it, a declarative is a way of saying there's a tower of 3 blocks, versus imperative is saying put down block A, put down block B on block A, put down block C on block B, and becomes this tower of 3 blocks. So the way to reason about how React works is where I am telling the computer what to do, and in a declarative way. And HTML is, by how it's structured, a declarative language. So if you've done HTML before, this should look similar. It's like there is a div, it has some kind of name, class name, and I'm saying show me a header, show a header here, and show a list of items, and each one is a Facebook product, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Oculus. So what they've done with React is they've taken the declarative nature of HTML and converted that into JavaScript, and allows you to actually write code on that looks um, directly with HTML-like syntax, which is what this is. So all the stuff you're seeing here, like in React, while it looks like HTML, it is actually JavaScript that is wrapped in a format that looks like HTML. So it's declarative. And that's where I'll stop here. To kind of get a bit more practical, we'll get into the exercise, the first exercise. So the first one is just a simple exercise of playing with some JavaScript and HTML. So in this one, we're just creating an element, and we're putting some information into that element, right? So this is just pure JavaScript. There's no React here. So if we click on to view it, you have to go to the URL as I showed you earlier, and then click on number one, exercise number one. And you'll see if I change the text content here, this element, hello Facebook developer circles is what I'm going to write. And that automatically saves. I just need to refresh the page. You'll see that it's changed here. Very simple exercise. It'd be good if you guys can do that, and just give a thumbs up once you've done that, and then we'll just quickly move on. Everybody tried their hand at that. They just need to go in here and make some changes. Now, I'll just quickly explain what this code is doing. Before this code is run, this is a body of this is HTML, and we have this thing called the root here, and it has okay. Sorry, there's someone that wants to be let in. I'm not looking at that. Let me fix that. Sorry, folks. Cool. Thanks for the heads up. All right, cool. All right, we're moving on to, I'll just quickly explain what this is. So this is just pure JavaScript. And you can see here that this is an imperative way to say on this page, what we want, the outcome that we want is to show a screen of text that says, hello, Facebook developer circles, or hello world. And the way we've done that is say, get me the root element, which is this. And then in that root element, create a div. So if you've ever used if you haven't before, when you're programming or developing using for HTML JavaScript, you want to be using the Chrome developer tab. So the way to get that is just to right click and either say inspect, and that'll give you this this section here. And in here, I can see what the page is. Right. So in here, there's a root, which was there before. But when the page loaded, I said in JavaScript, create a new element, a div. And then in that div, put this content, and then give the div the class name of container, and then from that append the elements that I created, this div, into the root element, right? So that is an imperative way of saying just show this. Now, if we look at React, the next exercise, so that exercise 2, if you jump to that, so just jump to exercise 2. We're doing somewhat of the same thing, but we're using React to do it. In this way, though, we're still kind of doing it in imperative style. So same exercise, you can change the content here. If you refresh the page, you'll see that the page changes. Very simple exercise. You can do that too. Again, what is happening here is once you decide you want to use React, you need to import the React library, which is what they've done up here already, but you don't need to worry about that. This is just set up to make things easy. And then in here, I was saying React, create a new element called a div. And in that element, give it the class name, and and one of the children is the text here. And then I'm telling React, the React DOM, to render this element that I've created in this root element. So this root element is this ID here, this ID root, which is the div here, and then render that to the screen. So React DOM is, so what React JavaScript, the folks at Facebook did was create what's called if you've done HTML before, you would, or HTML and JavaScript, you would know that everything on an HTML page starts with the HTML element, and everything after the HTML element is part of what's called the DOM, the document object model, right? It's what's referred to as a DOM, and that is just a representation of all the objects in a HTML page. It's just a structure. So a good example. This is just a picture of what the DOM is. So it's kind of like a graph. I've said there's a document, there's my root element, which is the HTML, and then in there's this element, and 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 that's how it links to each other. And that's how the HTML page knows to render, and like how it understands the hierarchy of things to render is through this domain object model. And it's if your background is computer science, it's kind of like a what's called a graph, a direct acyclic graph. It's not acyclic. Actually, it's not acyclic, but it's a graph. It's a graph element. So that's how things are kind of structured in HTML and JavaScript. What React has done is created what's called a virtual DOM, which is kind of like a shadow DOM of the HTML DOM. And what that means is when something changes, so this is kind of like the general view of how React works, is like there's because everything is JavaScript in React, even though when you write things that look like HTML, it's actually JavaScript. What happens is you have what's called the JSX file, which I'll show you what that means later. And what React converts the HTML-like syntax into pure JavaScript and renders that into what's called the virtual DOM, which is a representation of the browser DOM. And the reason for that is that it has that representation in memory. So when something changes on the DOM in the browser, React can react to that change and optimize and make that change the virtual DOM, and then send that back. So it's so any inputs changes or whatever gets sent back to the virtual DOM, and it can compute that a lot quicker and re-render the page a lot quicker. If it didn't do that, what you would have to do usually is you would have to refresh the page, and that takes a lot longer and is a lot more. It's a worse user experience than it just generating the elements again that is created, each component into this virtual DOM and re-rendering at the time. That's a lot. If you don't understand any of that, that's okay. It'll kind of make sense as we good. But do we have any questions so far? Yeah, looking at the chat window. Can I give a thumbs up if you're following? Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Cool. All right. So moving on to exercise 3. If you're following along, just jump into that. So with that, all that explanation, in reality, this is what that is. So this in exercise 2, this code that we wrote is exactly the same as this code in exercise 3. It's just that it's shorter. And because it's using JSX is just, it's kind of like Facebook's created this language that looks, as I said before, it looks like HTML, but it really is JavaScript. So this line here literally converts to that line. It's just that this one is just a lot easier to understand and to reason. It's like I'm saying here, I'm declaring here that, hey, I want a div element and give it a class of name container and say hello world in that. That's literally all it does. And this is just JSX. And I'm then saying render it into the DOM from this root element. So same exercise here. You can change that to whatever you want. And if you click on exercise 3, you'll see that that gets rendered out there. Cool. Pretty straightforward stuff. If no questions, I'll be moving on to the next one, 4. Okay. So sometimes when you have components, you have a structure of a page, and you have different elements in that page. You want a component, you want your components to be somewhat reusable, right? You want to be able to write a piece of code that says, for example, in this example, I want to write a piece of code that gives me a shopping list each time. And I don't want to repeat myself because I might use that shopping list component or that view in different parts of my website, right? So I want to be able to show that shopping list as many times as I want to, and not have to rewrite code. And to do that, React provides you with something it calls props, which is just a short for a property. In JavaScript, if you've done with JavaScript, you know that if you have a function can have properties. That's all that is. When you create a component, really what you're creating is a function. And as with any function, you can have properties on that function, right? So in this piece of code here, I'm saying, hey, I've created I've created some properties here. So I've said this this property children is equals to hello world. This property, this variable called class name, I've given it a name container, and I've also created an object called props, and in that object props contains children and class name as an object. and then I've created a React a React a React element, and I've said I've used the deconstructor syntax in ES6. Does everybody know what the deconstructor is? No. So a deconstructor. Nope. Okay. Some people say yeah. So, very quickly, a deconstructor is a syntax that just quickly says give everything in this particular object, display, show everything in this particular, bring out everything in this particular object and pass it down. So all that means is this ... props is the equivalent of me saying props children, it's and props class name, and passing that down, right? That's just a short form of saying do that, right? So if I had another variable in here called time, right? If I added a new one, then I'd have to go in here and say props.time again. So which is just kind of very long way of doing that. The easiest way to do that is just to say, instead of doing that, I'll just say ... props, right? I can provide more links to stuff that if anybody doesn't understand anything, that's okay. We'll just keep moving. But if you need more information about a particular concept, I can send you information after this. But for the sake of time, we'll just keep on moving. So yeah, so that's what that is. It's like I've kind of abstracted out in this example here, I've kind of placed everything in this one element. In here, I have said, hey, I've created these variables and I'm passing the variables down as props to a component, and then getting an element back and then displaying that element. And pretty much it just shows you the same thing. If I change, if I changed the name here, right? That shows that. Now a little bit of an exercise here. I've added this new property called time. If I wanted to display time into the screen, does anybody want to have a go at how you would do that? You all have the ability to unmute, so anybody can have a go. To have a property time, I've passed it into this element. How would I display that onto this? Taking into consideration that I'm passing this into a div, which is this element here. If you look at the other example, you can see in this case, I'm just displaying things directly into this section. Does anybody have a clue of how you would do that? No? Yes? All right. To do that, because this div I'd have to create, open up this div here. This is just a short form of saying, this is a a property, the div, and it's closed. But if I open it up, I can then say div, and then say props time is that. So that would show the time and the children as well. Or return an error. Ah, I didn't close the div. All right. Side note. Cool. Moving on to section 5. If anybody had questions, let me know. Right, section 5. So I talked about how you want to use the components. You want components in React to be reusable. So if you were to create a reusable component or a fragment, this is how you would do that. So instead of in here writing it like this, this is just you're creating a new variable element, and then you're using the syntax here to create a more expansive element. The reason why you do this is so that it's easier to read. So let's say I wanted hello, and I say span hello world span, and I wanted to create another one. The time is 14:04. Right, so that creates a fragment. That doesn't look nice. I want it to look better. I'll use this and just refresh. And as you can see, you can then create a whole element or a whole section of things in this one element. So it pretty much contains a piece of HTML code that you can kind of tune together. So I could say I wanted to create a different element. I could create in the shopping cart example that we're looking at, this one fragment. Like if I wanted to take just this bit and create and take that out into a fragment, I can do that. I'm not going to use the example here because you can't edit this, but I can do that, let's say, on top of this and say that shopping cart list is equal to these three things. This is an example of how you could do that. So have a go at that, and we'll move on. Again, just to reiterate, if you have any questions, let me know. If there's something that needs re-explaining, let me know. Do you recommend to use fragment, or is it better to have defined objects in the DOM? I don't think I understand that question. Do you want to go take yourself off mute and just maybe explain that better? I think everybody has the option to take themselves off mute. Don't be shy. We all learn when you ask questions. No? Well, I'll just re-explain that again. A fragment is just a piece of code that allows you to put JSX into a variable, like a variable like element. So in the next example, which is 6, right? We're creating a custom component, right? In this case, element here is a fragment. It's a fragment of JSX. So, and in this fragment, there's a div, hello world, goodbye world, and a closed div. In this div, there's a custom component called is someone coming in? I just added them, so cool. Yeah. So in the previous section, we had this little fragment, right? But if we wanted to create a custom component that we can reuse all over an app or use multiple times, this is how we would do it, right? We would create a custom component called message here, which is just a function. So components are literally just functions in React. So a JavaScript function can become a component. And in this function, I've said to create a custom component, all you need to do is you need to return a JSX object, right? So I've said there's a div here. I've given it the name message. Right. Okay. So I just got further details on that earlier question. When you define a fragment, the element will not be created in the DOM, but if you define a div, for example, you will see the element in the div, which is better. Or the question is when to use fragments. All right, cool. A fragment is just a variable. So this example here is probably a better one. So I can say, for example, there's so if we look at the 5, no 6, we're in 6 custom component. There's a component. I'll just explain what a component is. A component is a function that returns some JSX, so which it looks like HTML here. So in this case, I've said the function takes a property called children and then displays that property in a div with a class name message, right? With a class name message, and just it renders out that children, right? And this fragment here is creating a whole new is displaying 2 messages, one hello name, one goodbye, hello world, goodbye world, right? You need to think of a fragment as just a piece of code, like a variable. So if I created something else saying, hey, const hey is equal to another div, I just want to say hi, close that div. This does not render at all. It doesn't do anything because I haven't used that, right? Nothing happens. But if I want to render that, I can just come here and say, hey. This might give me an error. Let's see. Yep. All right. So that's a good example of that might actually just answer your question, that error. So what I did here was initially I tried to render out this thing that I created here as a component. So I kind of used the angular brackets there to try and do that, and it failed because this thing here, this fragment, is not a component yet, because a component has to be a function, right? So all I did was assign some some JSX into a variable, and to show that, I need to actually use this curly braces, which is the syntax for displaying variables here. If I wanted this to be a component, I would have to create a function to do that. So I'm just going to use the JavaScript shorthand for function, which is, so I'm going to create a new component called Hey Component. So I'm taking that fragment and I'm returning that here, right? This is just a shorthand of doing something like this. I can then say Hey Component and call it like that. And this should display this twice. This is a fragment. This is a component. I hope that answers that question. Any more questions? No. All right, we'll move on to prop types. How are we doing for time? How's everybody feeling? Does everyone want to keep going, or should we take a quick 2-minute break to stretch? Yes, no, maybe. Okay, everyone's good. All right, keep going. So we'll have someone else joining, just so you know, this is being recorded, and I'll try and after this session, I will share the recording so you can go through this again yourself. Yeah. So moving on to prop types of components. So we talked about earlier that a component can have properties, which we showed examples of in example, what was it? Four, which is prop types. Now, for the sake of making things, one of the issues that JavaScript, people don't like JavaScript, is you can assign any variable, and it doesn't matter the type, without declaring anything. So take, for example, I can assign a string into something that was an int before, which can cause problems down the line, because you might be writing a piece of code and you're expecting to get an integer, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but then someone has assigned a string to it, or you made a call to an API or external service, and the data type is not correct. So that causes an issue. To prevent that in JSX, or in React, React kind of gives you what's called a prop type, right? So here we are saying, this is to kind of read this. This is a component that's called say hello. Again, repeating, the component is just a function that returns some JSX. That's all it is. So I've said hello world, and I'm passing in two properties. Why not just use TypeScript at that stage? Is a question I just got. You can, but TypeScript, there's nothing wrong with using TypeScript. I find using TypeScript, this is a personal preference. I find using TypeScript in front end code to just be double work in terms of you need to reason in TypeScript, which then transpiles to JavaScript and then gets rendered out. So if something goes wrong, your reasoning is like you need to kind of be thinking in two levels. TypeScript is great for like server-side applications, I personally think, but for me personally, um, I prefer to just use plain JavaScript in front-end applications. It's just easier to reason, but that's a personal preference. So anyway, in React, you can actually define the property type that you're expecting. And if you put something there that is incorrect, an error will occur. So in this case, and you can say if it's required or not. So in this example, there's a component called say hello, first name, last name, properties, and the prop types here. So to use prop types, you need to import the prop types module from React. They've just done it here for you automatically. You don't have to worry about that. And in there, you can say that this say hello component expects two prop types, first name, last name, and one is a string. Sorry, they're both strings and they're both required, and render that out. So in this example here, obviously false, they've put in false as the first name. And that's obviously going to throw an error. So if I go prop types, it said hello and there's nothing there, right? Usually, so someone just put a request to edit this this project. If you're new and you don't you want to follow along, all you need to do is click the project options and say remix project, and then you have a copy for yourself. So you don't need to. We're not editing the same thing. You can just follow along as you want. Right. Anyway, to fix this, I just need to pass in a string. So I'm saying, say hello. I've declared the component. Say hello, first name, and then last name. I can put, well, I can, this should still work, but, right. If I want to add the last name, and I assign the property last name, right? And that's how you use properties or props in React. It's very simple. Any questions so far? No. So the next thing we're doing is looking at what's called interpolation. It's just a way of allowing you to render a string of text a lot and use variables with that text. So you are actually concatenating you're concatenating a string and inserting some kind of variable inside that string. So the best way to give it to show you what I mean is just to show you the difference. So in this example, I have a component called character count. It takes in a prop of text, and then it returns it returns the sentence the text has, and then the text length. And then what I'm doing here, this piece of code here is a if else statement in one line. I think it's called a unary. I think that's the term. So it's just saying if the text length, if there's actually if you actually passed in text, so if the length is greater than 0, then say what's the length is. So and then if it's not greater than 0, return no character. So as you can see here, for this element that we've created this two of them. One, the text is hello world. The other one, there's nothing in the text. So in here, I can then say the text hello world has 11 characters. That's the length. And the text bar has no characters, right? And this style here with the back ticks is what's called interpolation, right? It's a way to kind of render out information very quickly. The alternative way of doing this would be you'd have to write the text. So when we're writing out JavaScript in JSX, like we use the curly braces. So the text plus text plus has is how you would have written the exact same thing. So if and I didn't put spaces, so I need to do that. Right? Which is fine, but this is a better way of doing it. And it just makes your life easy. All you need to do is just put back ticks, and then we can then put in whatever variable into that, and it just kind of renders it out directly. And that's pretty much what interpolation is. Moving on to re-render. So if you remember earlier, I spoke about the virtual DOM that React has, right? When something changes, what it does, it uses, so the virtual DOM is a direct acyclic graph. And that's just a fancy term of saying it's a graph. And acyclic graph. I'll show you an example of what that means. So okay, quickly. So this is a graph. This is imagine this is a component with different elements in it. So this could be a div, this could be a span, etc. Let's say you want something has changed here at this level, right? In HTML, if you just put HTML and JavaScript, you would have to find this element. If anybody has used jQuery before, you'd have to say, when this thing happened, find this element D, and then change the information in there. What React does is says it, because it's created this graph in the virtual memory. If you want to change this, all it does is it says find where this element is on the graph, and then re-render anything that's changed. So it generates a new element, so a new D, and then it does a comparison to say what has changed, which is called diffing. So it diffs the difference, and then only updates the DOM based on the difference. So it's a much quicker way of re-rendering a page or an element than going to re-render the whole page as well. So that's just that's the kind of like the underlying view of how React work in the background, and that becomes useful when you're creating complicated web apps, which you'll see. So re-render, this re-render example just re-renders today's the time. Right? So it looks like it's live here. It's actually, but each time as this is ticking over, it re-renders those elements, as you can see in the, right? So the way you would do this if you're not using React, well, one way you could do it would be you could write a infinite loop, or you could write a timeout function that kind of says every 2 seconds do this thing, right? But this is a much efficient way of doing like you could use set interval, but you would then have to find this element each time and change the value. This way, this section just re-renders each time based on the changes. Is this similar to use state? Use state is something different. Use state is just a way of keeping the state of a function, which I'll explain a little bit better when we get to that. We will talk about state. This is just showing the example of how React re-renders stuff, right? So again, simple element. It just shows the time. There's a component. It's called time, and then in that component, I'm getting the current local time, and I'm created a fragment element that shows the current local time in the value, right? And then I've use this JavaScript function to say every 1 second call this function, and that just re-renders, right? So that re-renders the whole page. Now, I know you guys are sick of looking at very, very ugly, bland pages. In the next section, we'll be talking about how do you style things? How do you make things look good? But before that, I think I just need a 2-minute break. Right? Just to take the time to get up, stretch, and maybe use the bathroom. And we'll meet here in 2 minutes.
So Arnie asked if we're doing some GraphQL/React Relay work today.
Well, that was the intention initially, but I think some people kind of said that might be a bit too advanced for them. So this is kind of starting at basics. We will build up to that. If you're interested in doing that, we will build up to that. But we kind of need to walk a little before we run. And so that's kind of like for this one was just basic React. And just for those who want to do something a bit more advanced, we are getting to that. We will be creating a Tic Tac Toe game, which kind of uses all the elements of some of the things that people are asking for, which is state and effects and all that kind of stuff. So we will try and get to that as we go along. We're back. I'm just reading the comments.
So Arnie asked if we're doing some GraphQL/React Relay work today.
Well, that was the intention initially, but I think some people kind of said that might be a bit too advanced for them. So this is kind of starting at basics. We will build up to that. If you're interested in doing that, we will build up to that. But we kind of need to walk a little before we run. And so that's kind of like the for this one was just basic React. And just for those who want to do something a bit more advanced, we are getting to that. We will be creating a Tic Tac Toe game, which kind of uses all the elements of some of the things that people are asking for, which is state and effects and all that kind of stuff. So we will try and get to that as we go along. But everybody from the poll, it looks like there's a lot more ones from the people. Yeah, some twos. I'll try and just walk through the examples, and if anybody doesn't understand anything, you can just ask questions, and I'll re-explain that concept in the more advanced examples as well. How does that sound? Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Sounds good.
Cool. All right. Moving on to styling. So all the stuff we've looked at the moment has just been basic JavaScript. It hasn't looked nice. It's been very dry. In React, you can use the same CSS that we use for styling HTML to style React components as well. So in 10, you'll see that this file has a bit more to it. So first up the top, there's I really dislike the lack of highlighting, so I'm just going to quickly switch to this so it shows the highlighting. Just easier to see. It's exactly the same thing. I'm just using the code editor. Here we go. Right, so up the top, we've kind of just declared some CSS, some basic styles here. And so there are three kinds of, there's a regular box, there's a small, medium, and there are large boxes, and these ones have different height and width. And then we've created a component here called box, which takes in a style and then a size, and has a class name, and then it uses the I called this the deconstructor earlier. That's actually wrong. It's actually called the spread operator. Spread, like, spread. So it takes, as the example I gave earlier, it takes every property in an object and passes it along. And in this function, what it does is it allows you to dynamically give a box a size. So if we look at the output here, right, we have small light blue box, medium pink blocks, and large orange box. And we're using this property size to determine which CSS to use for this. So this is kind of like a clever way of creating dynamic components that can display differently based on different actions. So if we look at this, for example, yep. So the CSS uses this format of box -- large, and then based on whatever we pass in, so we say, okay, the box size is small. In here, it creates a new element of with box -- size, and passes that into that div. And so when it does that, the style will change. So yeah, and I've given it a background color, a different background colors, right? So you can style using this. but you can also style using inline CSS. So JSX can take in inline CSS as well as a class. So the final rendering is kind of looks like this. It's like box and then the size, and then you can pass in the fonts or different background color. So in this case, I can change, if I just switch back to the browser, I can add in other styles here. So I can say, what do I want to change? Font style. I'll change the font style. Font style is bold for the small one. If I refresh that, that changes the font style. Just double check that. Did I get that CSS wrong? Sorry, what I wanted to change was the font weight. Now it's become bold. Now, if you look here at the styling here in CSS, if I wanted to do something like change the font weight, the syntax would be font dash weight, and then the value. So in this case, it was bold. You will notice in JSX that when you're writing in React, you don't put the dash there. You just use font capital weight. So that React knows to automatically convert that. So anything with a dash in it, it'll change if you need to put that in. Is it camel case? I can't remember the case, but instead of a dash, it's like the lowercase for the first variable and then uppercase for the element after the dash, and that's how you do that. If you're playing with this, feel free to change the different styles. You can add different styles in here to play with that, and that'll automatically render onto the page. And that's how you kind of style. That's how you style React components. So moving on to 11, event handlers. With any dynamic or interactive applications, you need to be able to handle things that happen on a page. So what's called events. A React gives you a way to do that. So JavaScript already has event handling built in. Sorry, man. We'll just continue on that. What am I doing? Okay, so talking about event handlers. Yeah, so in this piece of code here, we are going to, the outcome is when we click, it shows you the amount of times we've clicked. When you type something, it shows what you've typed automatically, dynamically. which is pretty cool, right? How do we do that? So we want to reason when we come to when we are developing for React, we want to first reason about what we're trying to do before we start writing code. This is, I think, a good way of doing it. So I want to say, when I type in this text box, I want to show the result here in this element here, right? So if you want to reason about that in code, you say, when the input in this text box changes, show the result in this, right? So how do we do that? How do we do that? In here, there's the unchanged element, right? So we've created this component. It has these three things. It has the input here, which is this one, and then I've created what's called an event handler, which is handle change. So there's a function handle change. Event handlers in JavaScript pass an event to the event handler, and then I can do something with that. So the handle change is saying, okay, when a new input is being set, change the state of the current component. Before I keep going, does everybody understand what state is? Any comments? Maybe. Yep. Okay. So quick explanation. The state for an object, or state, is just the current state of, well, I can't give a definition, use the same word, right? It just tells you what's currently happening in a component, right? So currently, this button has been clicked 23 times, and I have put in this input, right? So these are both states of these of what's happening on the page, right? So in React, I need a way to be able to save the current state of the application, like something's what's currently happening in the application, and that uses something called state. Now, state, when you declare state is just an object, and when you declare when you want to actually change the state of an object in React, you want to use the set state function. So up at the top here, we've created an object for the state called event count, and another one called username, right? So the event count and username. And now for when I click on, when I want to handle the change of the input, I say set state of the username using the value of the inputs here. So this new value here, and that changes the state. And then same with the button, when there's a handle click function, which I've defined up the top. It's way easier to see here. Here we go. Blah, blah, blah. It's a slightly different, but no, this is the one. Yep. On handle change, take the value of that inputs, the first one, and place it into, and update the state information here. And then do the same when I click this button, I add once to the current state count and set that into the event count, right? And then I re-render the app. So, right, I have a function here that's called set state, and I'm giving it a new state. And then what I'm doing here is I'm just replacing the value of the initial state, which is this, with this new value, and then re-rendering the app each time. This is a very long way of doing this. You don't need to do this. This is just to highlight the example of how you would do it manually. React actually provides you with the tools for you to be able to manage its state dynamically. So yeah, so you don't need to do this. And in the next example, we'll highlight how you use the actual internal components of use state, which someone asked about earlier, which allows you to manage state without writing functions like these. I don't know if I did a good job of explaining that. So if there are any questions, probably let me know. You all have the ability to. No? Okay, we're moving on. All right, to explain, so we talked about event handlers and state changes and all that. To explain state, React has this utility called useState, right? So in this previous example, we manually created an object called state. We created an object called state, and then we're manually manipulating. We have to create a function called set state, and we are manually changing that as we go, right? That's what we're doing. But React already has the ability for us to do that. It actually makes it easy. If we go to this example, for state, instead of creating those two things automatically, React gives us this magical utility called useState. And what that does is, like, I can, at any point in time, I can say this. In this case, we have a component called greetings, and I can say, give me, I want to use state, and I want a state variable called name, and I want a function called set name. And in the use state, you are it passes in use state. You pass in an initial value, right, for use state. So if I look at the example 12, right? This is blank, right? So the components, just quickly look at the component, what it does. It has a name and it has an input value, and I can if the name is set, I say hello that name, and if the name is not set, I say please type your name. If I was to set the initial variable for use states to something, right, it would automatically show hello person, right, because that's the initial state that I've given it. In this case, I've set it to nothing again, and it renders please type your name, right? That's just to explain how this use state utility works. So, as I said, when you use React use state, it can provide you with two things: a state variable and also a function to change it. The reason why you use a function as opposed to manually saying name equals to, in this case, if we were to say name is equal to the value of the input, and we try to use that, it's going to cause an error. So you can see here, there's an error, and it says name is read only. Now, React doesn't like, it doesn't allow you, when you're dealing with components in React, it doesn't allow you to manually change the name by yourself. You need to create a function that changes that name, because it actually creates a new object each time and reassigns it to that variable name. So you can't directly modify that object. That's a concept called immutability. That's a new concept to you, it's something you probably want to write down and look up later. It's a key part of the way React works, to make it easy to re-render data quickly. Because immutability, when you are changing, immutability means it doesn't change. You create a new version of the same thing. Because if you're changing data in the DOM directly, it's hard to know what has happened, because the data is being changed each time. But if you're actually not changing the data and you're creating a new version, it's easier to know what happened, because you actually each time you're creating a new version of the same thing, and you can track those versions as time goes. So that's easier to reason about, and that's kind of like why React by default uses the concept of immutability. Yeah. Any questions on this? Nope. All right. Okay. So we talked about immutability. So everything is kind of it's a new object. Everything gets created anew each time. Nothing gets changed. But sometimes you're working in the world of the browser. You're working with other parts of the browser, and you need to make effects change. You need something to happen when a change happens. And the way you reason about that is you use what's called an effect, right? So in this example here, I'm just going to show it in this IDE. So when something happens in the browser, someone does something, another way to affect a change, like make something change, is to use the use effect utility. And what that does is allows you, it's what's called a concept called the hook, right? These two are called, this reactor use state and this reactor use effect are called hooks. The use effect hooks allows you to perform side effects in function components and reloads that every time the page gets re-rendered. So an example of this is like, I want to set the name. If I've come to this component before and I've used it before, I want to set the name of the person into the local cache of the browser. So take, for example, you're returning to a website and you were using the website before and you hit refresh. So in this case, this is the example of state for 12. I'm still there. Every time I hit refresh, right, that name is gone, right? You can imagine in a web application, that would be annoying if every time they hit refresh or something changes, all the information that you had is gone. So what you could do is you could save that into the local storage or cache of the browser using this window, the local storage. And the best way to do that will be to use an effect, because what you're saying is when the name is set or when the page re-renders, check to see if there's a name, and if there's a name, store it in the local storage. And also when the page re-renders, so this function is called, this greeting gets shown every time the page refreshes or re-renders. Check to see if when I want to initialize the state, of the component, I check to see if there's already a name that's been saved into the cache. If there isn't, just return blank. If there is, set the name to that name, right? So if we look at 13, right, there's nothing here, right? That's been stored into the local cache. If I hit refresh now, it always stays there, right? So that's an example of how you would use effect, or a scenario where you use effect. It's to store, for example, to store things in local memory for you to be used later. Any questions on that? No? Okay, let's use lazy initialization. All right, it's probably worth going into the next part of this, which is we're going to try and create that Tic Tac Toe game together. I think that might be, because we've kind of gone through a lot of concepts here. I think that'll help us tie it together and work through it. So I'll first of all, I'll upload a version of that to Glitch and share that with you guys, so you guys can get started and we'll follow along. And maybe we can use breakout rooms for that. Just give me a sec. I'll just push the changes I've made up so you guys can have them. In this time, if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. So looking at the components in index.js, right? We'll see that we have 3 components there. We don't need this app one, so you can delete that if you've already copied, if you're following along. We have 3 components. We have a square, we have a board, and we have a game, right? And then in the board, we have a function called render square, right? Which takes in a property at this point in time, I. It doesn't do anything right now, but and then we have the board, which renders all these squares. And that's the extent of what it does. It just renders a whole bunch of squares and it doesn't do anything at the moment. And the whole game just renders the board. And there's another component here, or another div with game info, right? So to get started, we'll try passing some data from our board component to our square component. So if you want to do that, we've seen how to do that previously. We have this this I property. So let's say we call the component value, the property value, and I, we're passing in I, right? So we've done that. So for each one of these, you have 0, 1, 2, 3 exterior. We've passed in that property. Now we need to actually display that property into the square component here. How would we do that? I think probably this is the time to let's try and start using the breakout room functionality. So we're going to assign half of you 3 participants into each room. Hello.
Hello.
We're all in breakout rooms. Does anybody want to have a go at the task at hand? Does everybody understand the task at hand?
Just give me 1 minute. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so the task is to like display the squares, right?
Display the value of the square. So you have render square, and
Yeah.
you've passed in values 0, 1, 2, 3 exterior. Yeah.
Okay.
So
we
if
have
we go to the render square method or function, which should be up the top.
Wait, what?
It should be up the top. Go up. Scroll up.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So the first thing you want to do is pass that I as a property to that square component.
Yeah.
Do you want to have a go at that? Just have a go. It's no.
Okay.
So we're passing the property in the render square. We're passing the property.
Prop dot. I forgot the syntax actually.
Okay, so that's correct. Prop dot. What are you gonna call the property? Because we're gonna need to define that.
Prop dot render square. Like prop dot square.
So in your example, you actually haven't created the prop yet, right? So in that square component,
Yeah.
in there, say value is equal to I.
Okay. Wait, prop or
No, in the square, in the squiggly lines.
here? Okay.
Yep, in there.
Yeah. Value is equal to I. Okay.
In curly braces.
Yeah.
No, the curly braces are around the I.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, that's correct. How do you display that in square? So prop dot what? What would you say? Prop dot.
Prop dot value.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
1 minute.
So now it's telling you prop is not defined.
Yeah.
Because we haven't defined prop in the square component.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense.
Okay, so we need to define that. So in actually the easiest way is just to say, because in the way in this syntax that we have right now for React, we're saying square extends React component. This is what's called like a class syntax, right? Do you know what a class is?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yes.
So to get props in this case, you say this dot prop.
Okay,
Props.
yeah.
Yeah.
This dot prop, it makes sense.
Props as opposed to prop.
Sorry.
That's okay. There's value. Now, if you want to see it just displaying live, go into in the top left where it says Tabby Tricky Teller. Top left. Top left.
Here? Oh, top. Okay.
Yep. Click that. And
Okay.
sorry, click and show. Sorry, not that one. In the top left, click and show. Yep,
Yeah.
that one. Say next to code. And that should display the results.
It's taking a lot of time. Yeah.
It's taking a little bit of time. It's
Yeah.
okay.
Try putting on a separate window. It's working for me.
It's working for
So
you?
if you
Yeah.
Okay.
Put on a
Cool.
separate window.
For me, it's taking a lot of time.
So what you could do is go into share and just copy the URL from there and try it in a separate window. So in the top left, there's share.
Let me share. Where exactly?
Next
Below.
Next to your picture. Next to your
Where is
profile.
it? Yeah.
Yep.
Not there.
No,
Next to it.
not there. Next to it. Yep.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, I see it.
Live app. Click live app. Copy.
Yeah.
Yep. And then just paste that into a new tab.
Okay. Cool.
It's still doing it. That's interesting. Does anybody have it? Tony, do you want to share your screen and show us what that looks like?
I'll just. Yeah.
There we go.
Is it working? Okay, cool.
Oh, okay.
So that's what it's supposed to look like.
Cool.
Any questions on this?
No, not really.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. We assigned.
Yeah.
We're just putting into practice the concepts that we learned earlier. We assigned some value to some props, and we display those values on the screen. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Actually, we might just keep going, Tony.
Yeah.
While we have you, so okay, we're just passing the props.
Yeah.
Now, what we want to do is make this thing interactive, right? So there's a button in the square component, right?
Yeah.
You see the button? Okay,
Yeah.
cool. In that button, we want to add some so the button is what's showing up, the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. When someone clicks on that button, we want to actually show an alert and show the number of what's been clicked, right? Right. So that's what we want to do. We want to. So if we reason on it, what we're trying to tell the application is when someone clicks, show an alert and show the number of what was clicked. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So in that button, you want to first, if you remember the event handling exercise, you want to pass an event to that button, right? So in this case, it's the onClick event. So in the button, you want to create a property of onClick. A property. So the property has to be in between the brackets. Oh yeah. The angular brackets. No, the angular brackets of the button itself.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we've defined the components. Yeah.
Yeah.
So on click, the syntax is what's it called? Camel case. So on is lowercase, and then click is capital. Correct. And in there, we want to pass in a function. So anything to do with functions, you use the curly brackets. Anything to do with JavaScript, you use the curly brackets. If it's something to do with string, then you use a quote. So in this case, it's a function. So curly brackets without the quotes, right?
Yeah.
And then in there, let's say square clicked. Let's call something called square clicked. Yep, cool. Good job with this with the syntax. Now in that component, we want to define. Actually, we want to say this dot square click. All right. Okay. So what we're saying is there's a function in there called square clicked. Obviously, it doesn't exist at the moment. So we want to define that function. So in the body of the square component. So right now we're in the render function. We want to outside of the render function.
Down here.
No, outside of the function. So you have to go outside of the body. So probably do it on top. So if you go up. Yep, just new tab. Yep. Create a function called square clicked. Do you know the syntax for functions? Yeah.
Not this language, but
Yep. So we're going to be passing. Let's just test to see if this will work. So just type in alert, clicked, alert, and then pass in a string and say clicked. Okay, let's try that out. Cool. Cool. Now we want to pass in the value of that square. Right? Where would we get that from?
Down here.
So we've passed that in. So if you trace all the way back,
yeah.
So we've passed in 0. Let's say it's example 0 because there are multiple here. Is 0.
Yeah.
In render square, we've passed in I.
Yeah.
And that's come to the square component as a prop. Right? So where would we get that value when I'm in square? In the square component.
Just saying. Obviously, props up value.
Yep. So you just that's exactly it. You just copy. You can just use that same code right there.
So I can put it in here.
If you want to do that in there, you have to use the interpolation syntax, which uses backticks. So you want to change from quotes to backticks. So, yep. No, it's that one. Yep. Create a space. And then you want to use the syntax dollar sign, bracket. Yep. And then put in the value that you want to show there. Okay. Give that a go. It's failing.
Yeah.
right click on your browser and say inspect. Go into console. It is the second tab of the inspect. Right? Could not read property props of undefined square clicked. Is there? I think we might need to use a different syntax. This to square mix. Can I read properly props of undefined? All right. Maybe what we'll do is just pass the value of I don't know you can't access props in outside of the render function. So that's just a good lesson. You can't access it there. So we're going to pass the property that we want into the square clicked function. So in square click, just give it a property saying number or something. Yeah. And then just change the alert back to what we had it before. The number has to be within the bracket. Yeah. All right, cool. And then in onClick, what we're going to do is we're going to pass, instead of just passing in that function directly, which is square clicked, which it'll work, but it's not good. Nothing's going to show up because there's no number. You haven't passed that in. Actually, sorry, you need to change clicked from this.props.value to number. Yeah.
And then you have to put in here, all right?
Yes, but it's not going to work if you do that. You tried. Let's it's a good chance to this.props.value.
Oh.
Probably easier to copy and paste.
Yeah, no, I don't know why it's not typing.
Yeah, so it's doing that because what you're doing is you're actually calling that function
when you
as a
button.
Yeah. So when each time the square is being rendered, you're actually calling that function, right? We don't want to call the function. So what we need to do is create another function. So that syntax is correct. Leave that alone. Leave that alone. In there, in onClick, we create what we want to create is the simple way of doing it is to create what's called an anonymous function. And the syntax for that is after the opening bracket for the onClick, it's two parentheses. Type into, yep, no. Yep, that one. And then equal sign. Angular open, angular close, like, no, the other way. Just one of them. Pointing to the right. Yep.
Oh,
Those two. Yeah,
Yes, they
those
are.
two together.
Yep.
And then actually that's it. That's it.
Yep.
Yeah. So now click.
Now it's coming up. Yeah. Cool.
Cool.
Yeah.
Any questions on this?
No, I've got it. It's fine.
All right, cool. That was kind of good. I think I'm just going to close all the breakout rooms and we'll move into the main session again. Me too. Yep. Thank you. All right. So that simple example kind of shows you how you would render out a value. So I'll just do that here. And yeah, that's great. Where's my CSS? Why is my CSS not working? Anyway, cool. The next task is to, and we've done an on-click. For each of the buttons. So I'll just quickly do that. On-click. So now we want the square component to remember when it gets clicked. So we want each square component to have a state value for each for each time it gets clicked. So remember in one of the other examples, we could save the state. I'll just quickly open that back up. Cool. So when we wanted to save state, we use this react.useState, and we set that up to have a name and then a function set name for the state. Now for each square, we want to have it remember that it got clicked, and fill instead of 0, 1, 2, 3 exterior, we want to fill each one of each thing with X. So it's like if I click 1, instead of showing 1, it should show X, really. That's the idea. So to do that, I'm just going to quickly rewrite this into to change out of this class syntax. This is exactly the same, just so you know, as me writing this. It's just shorthand, and it's just way easier to reason about than to write the whole thing. So I'm just going to quickly do that. To return. this is not going to work. Sorry. And the reason for that is this project is not set up to use the syntax. All right. Sorry. We're going to have to do it the long way. All good. So in this class, we need to set up the state. In this syntax for React, to do that, we kind of need to create a constructor for the class. In the constructor, so feel free to follow along. We're going to passing by default, because the square component extends from this React component, and this React component has a constructor, and that constructor has the syntax of constructor with props, which it passes along. To get this to work, you need to say super props, so it initializes the class it extends from, and then you're able to access the value of, you can then set up the state here. So in this format, the way we'd set up the state would just be to use this hook here and say react.useState and set it an initial value. But in this case, we want to say this.state is equal to value, we just say null at this point in time. So here's us initializing the state of the component. We're not doing anything with this at this point in time. The next step would be on click, we want to set the value of the state. When we're using the React.component, this class structure, this comes with a property called this.setState. Same way as I explained earlier, you cannot change the state directly. Like if I was to come in here and say this.state.value is equal to whatever, it's going to return an error, right? So, but this class comes with a property called this.setState, and then we can use that to change the name of, we can use that to change the value of the state. So instead of alerting here, so we want to say this.setState and value, which is the value here, is equal to X. And nothing's changing. Let's see. What have I done wrong? Set state is what we want. It's probably easier just to see what's happening. It's actually working. It's not showing anything because we're not displaying anything, right? So each time we're displaying, we're actually displaying this.props as opposed to this.state. So it's actually doing what it's supposed to do. So in order to show that X, we need to say this.state.value. Any questions on this? Is there part of this that someone wants me to explain? Yes, no? Thoughts, comments, feedback? Or do we get thumbs up to just now I can move on? Okay, moving on. Okay. So an easy way to also to help you reason about what's happening in when you're developing React is to use the React developer tools. So I already have that installed. So you might not have that installed. That's a Chrome extension or Firefox extension that allows you to see what's happening in your React app. I just kind of shared that. So it should allow you to just, when you install that, a new section in your DevTools comes up called components, and it allows you to see exactly all the components on the page and the values of things. So the square has a value, this square that I'm looking at right now has a value of 0. This one has a value of 1, etc. It's a useful tool when you're debugging. Okay, the next part of this would be to, because we're trying to create the Tic Tac Toe game, right? So initially when the game loads up, all the squares should be blank. And then when I press X, the next time I press click another square, that should be an O, and the next time after that, exterior. So you need to kind of do that back and forth each time. So currently, each square maintains its state. So we need to kind of find a way to maintain the value of each of the 9 squares, right? So because for Tic Tac Toe, we need to know the state of each one of these, right? And so that state needs to be sitting in the board component, right? Yep, cool, no worries. Thanks for being along. So I just have Tony and someone that's called 404. How you guys feeling about where we are so far? You have the ability to unmute yourself, so it'd be good to kind of get some.
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, following along at the moment. How we are.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Okay. So, as I was mentioning, we need to know the state of each one of these 9 elements as we go along. And the place to kind of store that would be in the board component, right? So we will do something similar in board to kind of initialize the state. So I'm just going to copy this section here. And the state, I'm just going to call it game values or squares, easier. Right. And that is going to be, because I want to store each one of these, the best data structure to use would be an array. So I'll create a new array, and I'm going to use the fill functionality. So I'll say array9.fill with null. So just what this does is just create an array with length 9 and fills it with the value null. And then so for each one of these, we need to be able to pass down the current state of each square back into the square itself. So thinking about the render method here, in render square, how would I pass the state down to the square? There's only 2 people in here, so might as well make it interactive. Any ideas?
Maybe like you got squares and you got the array number for each one, each array value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where would you pass that?
But in it, well, when it says render square, would you put render square and it says 0? It would be like square brackets 0 in it as an array.
Yeah, pretty much. But we kind of need this because this is static 0, 1, 2, 3, because we want to keep the location. It's best to do it here because we're passing in that value. So you're correct in that thinking. So we'll just say this the state dot squares. So it's initialized now, and the value is just null. So if we look at the components, if we inspect the components, you'll see each one of these is null, right? So each square needs to have either an X or an O. How would we determine, what do you think would be the best way to determine if we should use an X or no?
Sorry, I was unmuted. I mean, like, you get the value of whatever the next player is, and that should be an X, and then that then changes when that turns to go on to a 0 and O. So you probably put it in the status part. You change the value.
Okay, so in the status,
Status, yeah, you would change have a variable.
okay, where would you start that variable?
Probably at the start of the board or something.
Probably at the start of the what, sorry?
Of the board class.
Yeah, so you would, yeah, you're on the right track. You would say you could create a new state value.
Yeah.
Player. We can just always say it's default. It starts with X, right?
Yeah.
And then when we're rendering, we'll say, okay, the next player is we'll fix the syntax in a sec. Is this dot state dot player? All right. So that's all well and good. How do we tell the square to render X or 0?
Maybe you could use a ternary operator to get if it's X. Oh no, it doesn't want to work. If X, then otherwise opposite. Or if it's X, B is O, otherwise P.
So you have to remember as well that the value here is always X at the moment in square.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So there's two things. We need to be able to tell the square component what to render, right?
Yeah.
So there are two ways we can do this. We can either say pass down each time we can pass down the current player to the square, right? But that would mean, so for example, we could say current player. I'll just use an example here. Square values is X, and yep. So for each one of these, right? That might just be too complicated to get it to work. So actually, let's take a step back. Let's reason about what we're trying to do. When I click X, sorry, when I click any one of the square, I want the current player value to come in here, right? That's what I want, right? And we have a few. The tree of this is the board. There's the board, and there are squares, right? The board knows the current state of the whole game, right? The board knows what's happening. The square is what's called a dumb component, right? It doesn't know what's happening. It's an individual piece. Is an individual piece of this puzzle. It should just display a thing when the board tells it to. So an easy way to do this would be to say, hey, when when this square gets clicked, like a square gets clicked, let the board know that a square has gotten clicked, right? And then change the value of the current of that square, the index of that square, because that value gets passed down each time, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like you have to think of it's like it goes up and then comes back down.
Oh yeah.
You understand what I mean? So it's like the square bubbles up, says, "Hey, something's happened," tells the board that I got clicked, and then the board does something and passes the value of that change, that effect, back to the square, right? And the easiest way to do that would be to actually pass in a prop into the square to tell it what to do when it gets clicked, right? So in this example here, we're passing in a value into like just a regular variable into the square, but we can also pass functions into components, right? We don't we can also pass functions into components. So that means we can say on click of this square, we'll just use that syntax that I showed earlier. Say square clicked, and we want that the value, the number for the square, like what's the value, current value. So this is this dot square clicked. We then create a function called square clicked. And what do you think we do here?
Then change you would change the state of the square.
Exactly. You change the states of the square.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So in this case, we say this dot so remember we set state.
Yes, that's right.
And then we say squares. So this is an important point to remember, that this is an array. Squares is an array, and in React you cannot you can't overwrite. It has to be, you have to give it a new object. So we want to take the current object, and replace the value at that index.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So the best way to do that would be to create a copy of the current squares, right?
Yeah.
And you can use array.slice, or you can actually use the spread operator, which is one we showed earlier. So I can say squares. right? That copies everything into that. I then say is equals to the current player. So this dot state dot player. So I've set squares. Then I need to also change the current player. Well, I can do that at the same time. I don't need to do that twice, actually. I can just say
Yeah.
yep. So this is all well and good. So I'm passing this function down. I then need to change the. Why is there an error? Is there an error? No. I think it's doing this thing. Anyway, we then need to decide. We then need to work with the square to handle that on click, right? So we're passing down. This hasn't changed anything. Because in here, under unclick here, we're still doing the same thing, but now we are passing in a property of unclick down into the square.
Yeah.
So how would we use that here? Unclick is a prop.
Yeah, you put.
So how do we call the unclick prop from square? How do you access the props of a component?
Blank.
Is this those props?
Oh, you have to, yes, those props. And then I'll click.
Yep. And then we also get the current value that's being passed down. So
Okay.
is it re-rendered? Let's see. It's taking its time to load.
You're on mute.
I've said all the stuff. Yeah, sorry, I was muting myself. I was just saying that it'd be an interesting exercise to have you or anybody watching this work on changing the function, work on completing the functionality for this. The next things to do would be to determine when the game has been won, right? So, and also to stop the player from clicking the same square twice.
Yeah.
Yep. And if you're feeling a bit more creative, having, when the game starts, having, you know, maybe names for each player, so you can do that and change, etc. But the easiest thing would be, well, the easiest, but the next thing the logical thing would be to try and determine when the game has been won and stop an X on O from changing if it's already been placed. But yeah, but I'll leave it here at this point in time.
Okay. Yeah. A lot to get my head around.
Yeah, thanks for coming to this. We'll probably share the recording for this so that, you know, people can access again, and also share just some feedback if you can provide some feedback. That'll be good, just so we can improve on this and see how else we can help.
Sure.
Cool. All right, with that, is there anything else you wanted to add, Rachel? You're on mute.
No, but yeah, thanks so much for the session. Yeah, and thanks for coming, Tony. Hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, cool. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. Be safe, and if you can, keep other people safe.
Yeah, you guys as well. Have and yeah, have a good day ahead. And yeah, we'll put the recording up.
All right. Cheers.
Right. Yeah.